Join the Shot Talk Patreon at patreon.com/shottalk. You'll receive early access to videos, have the ability to submit questions to future guests, and more. Thanks and enjoy.
And I feel that as director, I feel one of the things that's the most important is that directing is, to me, is a lot of small decisions. It's not one big thing that you're like, this is what's gonna make it or break it. And if you get most of them right, you get a good product. And if you get most of them wrong, then you get a bad product.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Shot Talk. Today I have on the program the esteemed Liron Topaz. Liron, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a long time coming.
The
esteemed, yes.
Pretty big.
Of course. Dude, so you're the first guy that I shared a space with, literal space with, out here coming to Los Angeles to work in animation. So I feel this is sort of a kind of a full circle kind of thing, because now here we are again. About as far as we were sitting away from each other back at DreamWorks, right?
Yeah, that's pretty funny. But we were facing our backs to each other.
Our backs were to each other, and we would still send each other IM messages through there.
Yeah, even though we were that close. Yeah.
Right, because hey, you know, why waste the calories, I guess. So. But yeah, man. Well, I'm excited to have you on because you just finished a short film, Bilby. So you want to talk a little bit about what that's about?
Yeah, I mean, Bilby was a short film that we just finished. I wrote and co-directed it with JP Sands and Pierre Perifel. And basically, it tells a story about this marsupial called Bilby. It's an actual animal.
Which I didn't know existed. Those
right,
are real.
People think it's like a blue rabbit, but it's actually a real animal, Bilby. And it's basically telling the story of this Bilby in the middle of the most hostile environment known to man, which is Australia.
The outback.
All the outback of Australia, all the different animals trying to get him, and he's trying to survive. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a crazy experience overall.
Let me ask you, why did you decide on an actual Bilby? Like, how did you even discover what a Bilby was? Like,
well, the thing is that we were actually, the three of us were working on a film. And the film was set in Australia with a lot of the different animals in Australia.
I gotcha. So there was something else. Okay.
Yeah, and the film was canceled, and we decided at that point the DreamWorks opened a shorts program.
Right.
And we decided, you know what? We love the environment of the outback, and we would love to try to tell our own story in that setting. So basically, we came up with a story about, you know, since it's such a hostile environment, how can we tell a story about the most innocent character in that crazy environment?
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, it's funny because none of you have an Australian background. In fact, the whole team is pretty international, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you have Pierre, who's from France, and then JP, who's originally from...
he's from Venezuela.
Venezuela, yeah. And then you're from Israel.
Yeah.
So I was trying to... The math didn't add up.
Well, if you connect the 3 points, France, Venezuela, and Israel, you get to nowhere. It's in the middle of the ocean. But I always loved Australia. Ever since I was a kid, I was obsessed about platypuses. Like platypus as an animal was my favorite as a kid.
Little weird animals.
And I was really, really into Australia and Australian animals, even though I've never been there. And when I heard that the studio that they're doing a film about Australia, I really, really wanted to get to that. I really, really pushed hard to try to get onto that film.
Yeah. Something that I thought was really interesting was DreamWorks, up until recently, had never really done a shorts program.
Right.
And for me, at least when I first joined the company, I kind of wish that they had a place for like a creative outlet, right, that way. So it's incredible that they're finally allowing that.
It's pretty amazing. This is one of the first things that Chris DeFaria did when he basically came to the studio. The studio was acquired by Comcast.
Yeah.
And one of the bigger changes that they did was, you know, open the shorts program, which for us as artists was huge. Like you're saying, it's a great creative outlet.
So many of the greats got their start from shorts. I mean, like Tim Burton had a short while he was at Disney that then eventually led to a film career. So that's always a proving grounds, right? For new artists.
Well, I think there's a few really big advantages of shorts. First of all, it gives people the opportunity to rise to the occasion. People like us that have never directed before, gives us an opportunity to show if we're able to do that or not. And we had the head of layout, which was first time head of layout, and we had the head of CFX doing that for the first time. So a lot of people got this really big chance on this because it's a short. But the other thing is that the studio is also testing new technology. Pixar have been doing that for years.
Right.
Basically, getting a few things that they want to test out in a production before it goes to a full feature film, which is like, once you start a feature, there's no turning back. It's like a big machine that's running.
A lot of people don't realize that most Pixar shorts, there's always, it's either like the squishiness of the alien that then turns into the fat people and Up, or something that they're figuring out.
For the birds was the first time they did feathers, so they wanted to test that, and even the recent Piper was a way for them to test a new technology for flocks.
Okay.
So basically, every time they do a short, they also obviously they come up with a great narrative and they think about the story and the characters and everything. But there's also the technical aspect of it, of them trying different new technology and testing it in a smaller project.
Right, which is a really smart way of doing it. So, so you said DreamWorks was messing with that kind of approach?
Yeah, so we were basically the first time that we are testing our new proprietary software for rendering, which is called Moonray.
Okay.
And they rendered the entire short with that render, which is a real-time full radiosity render. Basically now all our next feature films are basically going to use that technology.
Fantastic.
So this was a place for them to test up all the issues.
Do you know what it sort of makes better? Because for me, watching Bilby, besides having a good experience with the actual story and this and that, it felt to me very, very vivid, the colors, and it felt also the organics felt almost very tactile. And I don't know if that had anything to do with this rendering system.
Well, I think the render system, what it gives us is the realism, the believability, the way the light bounces off the ground, the way it casting shadows, the occlusion, the all these things make it a little bit more like physical light. So that usually tends to go into a more hyperrealism render. What we wanted to do in Bilby was we wanted to make it illustrative. But the combination of this believability of the render engine and the illustration art direction brought this really interesting look that I personally really like. Like the fur feels so believable. You can really touch it, you can really feel it. But then it feels like an illustration. It feels like a drawing. So I think that was mostly because our lighting team was following very closely the art direction that was given from our art director, Rich Daskas. He did basically paintings for almost every major shot in the film.
Yeah, that's something that I know DreamWorks in the past they've been critical about, because it's that fine balance of making 3D believable yet stylized enough to where it's not unappealing. But that was the whole Shrek aesthetic that people make a meme out of now. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, it's like too much texture, too much detail, so it gets kind of weird. But yeah, Bilby has this. It strikes this amazing balance of, like you said, very realistic, but it still looks very illustrated or cartoony on purpose.
And I think they've done that very successfully before with movies like Kung Fu Panda, for example. The look of it feels very illustrative and feels very. The art direction is very, very strong there.
Nico Marlowe.
I mean the art direction is mainly from Ramon, who is the production designer for all three pandas.
Oh, okay.
Nico did the character designs for them, but what's lacking in the Panda films. And, again, for the time, it was amazing, but what's lacking for the next generation of films is that what the render engine can bring. Basically, that takes it to the next level and makes the strong art direction feel a lot more believable.
Right. Well, let's talk about the story itself, the emotional aspect, because when I watched this, knowing you as long as I have, I couldn't help but feel that it definitely did have your touch, because you tend to... you tend to have stuff that is, there's like a humanity to some of it. Because I remember seeing your short film that you did at,
at Ringling.
Ringling, right.
Yeah.
And that was very much a Liron short. Sort of like a lot of internal thinking and you can, it's like the clarity of the character comes out because the acting is so clear and there's a lot of stuff happening inside the character. And so I saw that working really well again in Bilby. And I thought, oh yeah, this is Liron doing his thing again. So yeah, well let me ask you, how did you come up with the little idea for the character to do what he does in the whole thing?
Yeah. So it's interesting because only recently, it's been 10 years since I did my student film.
Right.
And only recently, I don't even remember how, but I realized a lot of similarities between the two.
Okay.
Which was very weird to me because, I haven't even thought about that by when doing Bilby. Also because I was doing it with two other people, so that thought never even occurred to me. But when I think about the structure of my student film, it's basically a first act, a montage, and a final act. And when I think about Bilby, it's a very similar structure.
Yeah.
I think both of them also talk about, like you're saying, the charming moments, which personally is my favorite thing in animation. When I see, a lot of animators love those acting moments that they have the character talking and doing their monologue and dialogue, and for me, it's mainly those quiet moments that the character is really thinking.
You can see the internal argument.
Yeah, and also it feels those are the most charming moments. Like for me, Forbidden Friendship from Dragon 1 is probably one of the best moments in animation history.
You're talking about when Hiccup and Toothless,
Yeah, when
they have
he
that
does
moment.
his iconic.
Yeah.
But it works so well because, in my opinion, because it doesn't have a single word of dialogue. Because all their communication is nonverbal. All the communication is just by body language and their mannerism and those subtleties, and that for me makes it timeless and universal.
Yeah.
In a really big way. And a lot of the shorts from Pixar are doing the same thing because they have no dialogue. So one of the things when DreamWorks announced the shorts program, one of the first things I wanted to do in a short was to tell a short the way I like.
Yeah.
The way which is non-verbal, no dialogue, no nothing, and then basically tell a story basically about a charming character and a charming relationship between two characters.
I think that's a filmmaker tendency. I've talked to people, and I've also been in the situation with television animation where it feels like there are two forces of some people who are masters of the word in the script who want more and more talking, and then you have maybe the slightly more filmic people who are like, no, we can, less is more, less is more.
Yeah.
So that was another thing that I thought was pretty refreshing about that approach, is that it was crystal clear and they didn't have to say utter a single word, which was nice.
Yeah, no, I think really that makes it, in my opinion, a lot more universal. Like a lot more people can relate to that story because of that.
Right.
Because I think when you're relying on dialogue, you're also relying on cultural, what's the word for that?
References?
Cultural references, but also cultural
colloquialisms.
How cultural conceive, basically, or how people conceive our culture. When you're relying your story about dialogue, even the dialogue itself, the way we were talking, 10, 20 years, 30 years from now is not the same as we're talking right now.
Interesting.
It changes very much through the years. But our body language, I don't believe have changed in thousands of years. I think basically us being human. And I think I realized that when my first son was born and he started doing gestures that I was certain these were gestures that we pick up from society.
Right.
But he started doing those gestures on his own, and you're like, where did you see that? Where did you bring that from?
Interesting.
And then you're like, well, I guess that's something that comes from inside.
It's more nature than
It's
nurture.
a lot more nature, I feel.
That's interesting.
And I think because of that, I think people can relate to those moments in a deeper level. You see what I mean? It's
Absolutely.
It's like
I mean, it's Charlie Chaplin, right? When it's very clear what he's doing.
well,
right?
Charlie Chaplin took it to a whole different level. I mean, he started from that, but he played off of a cultural mannerism.
Okay.
Basically, he took that and he added a lot of things that were true to that period of time, and he made that into becoming very, the comedy and the timing and everything,
right.
and he exaggerated it to a caricature. That's not exactly what we did in Bilby, because in Bilby we're trying to be more sincere and more truthful to the moment.
Correct. Right. I see what you mean. So it's more exhibiting human emotion in a very clear, naturalistic way that has. It's universal because obviously it's you don't have to speak that language. That's so funny. It's so funny that you were looking at your son through the lens of a of a
Oh, of
filmmaker.
course.
Yeah.
All the time. We look
Yeah.
at everything as, as a filmmaker or as an animator. You look at that at everything.
Right.
But especially, I think when you have a kid and you start observing them so much because it's fascinating. Like the first time they pull themselves up, or the first time they start walking, you're so mesmerized with what you're seeing is that you're observing every tiny thing.
Yeah.
And to see him do stuff that I was certain would be, gestures that we pick up from other people.
A lot of squash and stretch with babies, I imagine.
Well, yeah, he's very squishy at the beginning. No, but even it's even gestures, like if he's being upset of how he's
Right.
frowning, or if he's like, if he's like leaning on something, or if he's just like being very, I don't know,
Emotive.
playful. It's just things that you really expect to for them to pick up from TV or from from other people. But when they do it at such early age, you're like, it really tells you that it's something that comes from inside.
I think what you're talking about is usually what the ideal demo reel is, right? I think that's why I speak for myself when I did Animation Mentor, that you would see sort of the star reels, and it was that sort of clarity, that sort of like super expressive, emotive character moments that I thought, man, I want to try to do that one day. Like that's sort of the goal in my head, and that's usually, I think, generally what big studios look for, right? When they're trying to pick out, future animators, right?
I mean, I think it's part of what they're looking. I think there's a lot of different things that studios are looking at, and also different studios are looking at different things. But I think it's interesting because I think there's a lot of ways to impress a studio, to show them that you're worth, hiring. Basically, if we're talking about hiring purposes right now,
Right.
it could also bring like a very, very impressive physical shot. If you have a character fighting 5 different characters, and the way the choreography works and the way the movement works, you can also impress in that regard. I think it's whatever you choose to do. If it's a dialogue or an action scene or a cartoony shot or a realistic shot, it's when you take that and you take it to the next level and you really show them, look, I have full understanding of this style.
Right.
And if that style appeals to the studio, then it's a good match.
Right. If you're
basically.
a video game company and you're looking for kung
Right.
fu, that's who you want to hire.
Exactly.
Right?
If you're a game company that does very like violent games, and you show them this little charming moment, I'm
Right.
not sure how much that's going to help you.
Right.
But if you show that charming moment to studios that deal with charming moments, then yeah, you can show them my sensibility is what you guys are looking for.
And I've noticed that that's something that you also have a pretty good grasp on as well, is the physicality and sort of the believable weight and motion and things like that. So that's,
Well, I think as an animator, it's interesting because my goal from school was subtle acting. Subtle acting was what I was mostly interested in. And when I got to DreamWorks, I was waiting for my, I got to DreamWorks, I was like, okay, I'm ready for my close-up shot. I can do all these small nuances. I can really show, this amazing performance.
right.
And
Character thinking.
yeah, and then they give you this bunny behind a million other characters, and they're like, here you go, that's your character. And you're like, what do you mean?
Right.
No one's ever going to see that. And they're like,
Right.
exactly. No, make that shine. And, slowly you kind of, get a little bit of better and a little bit bigger shots, and you try to prove yourself. But it takes really, really long time to get to those acting scenes.
Yeah.
So I think what a lot of people are doing is they're focusing on one specific thing. But for me, it was always fascinating to kind of, I had this passion to kind of master all these different styles.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really wanted to do
Broad.
what's that?
Like broad cartoony stuff.
I really want to do broad cartoony stuff. I really want to do realistic, subtle stuff. I really want to do, convincing mechanics. I really want to do creatures. I really want to do all of it. And I couldn't pick between the different styles because I really wanted to learn all of it. And what I feel is, I think it was Josh Beveridge from Sony. I was starting actually before DreamWorks. I was at Sony.
That's right. You did Alice, right?
Alice in Wonderland, yeah.
Right.
Which was a very interesting show. But Josh Beveridge, he's one of the head of animations over there right now, and he was telling me something that always kind of stood in my memory. That he was like, even if you're a very cartoony person or you like cartoony animation, when you do realistic stuff, it sharpens your cartoony skills. And when you do cartoony stuff, it sharpens your realistic skills, which was very strange to me because I thought, well, if you want to do realistic stuff, you dive into that world. And if you want to do cartoony, you do the same. But the way he described it is that those could coexist and you can actually benefit from both. And I find it very, very, first of all, at that time, it was mind-blowing because I didn't even think about that. But now I find it very, very useful. Because even when I do realistic stuff, and even if it's just like pushing the spacing on one thing the way you would do in a cartoony thing, that thing now stands out. Or exaggerating certain things to make it feel more believable.
More believable, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And even in the cartoony stuff, it's bringing that believability to the cartoony stuff. So it's not just stretching and moving around very, randomness, random, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's more making it feel like it's a believable character. It's just being pushed and caricaturized to be cartoony.
I think one of the crutches of, especially with cartoony animation, is that you sort of find your bag of tricks and you tend to sort of go back to those bag of tricks and you say, oh, the character is going to be surprised, so I'm going to have him do an anticipation where he goes down and he pops his head back up. And that is, like, all those things are effective, but at what point does it become cliche, right? So I think that's when you talk about why it's important to try to do the realistic stuff, because then that sort of will put a different spin on maybe if you're doing something cartoony with acting, right? So, yeah.
Well, I think the same type of cliches and go-to tricks can happen in realism.
Okay.
The same type of, okay, I have a character doing a step, so I'm going to do all this residual motion in the shoulders and in the chest and in the head and all these things. And you could easily fall into the trap of just using the tricks that you already know. I think, though, the best way to avoid that is basically, to look at real life, to really look for interesting things that were not there before, that were not in your conscious before. And every time, even if I'm doing a cartoony shot, I would always shoot reference just to kind of see what real life is doing. And then I'll be like, oh, this was interesting. This is something I didn't expect. This is something that, I wouldn't do. And then you try to incorporate that into your animation.
Totally.
And you always use your bag of tricks because, that's what we do.
Right.
But I think the main thing is not to go to the same ideas all the time.
Right. But I see what you mean, like taking the bigger idea, but then enhancing it with animation technique, right? Yeah. I have to say that's something that when I was in school, I used to fawn over like a lot of the French animation, because they struck that really nice balance of having very like the thing we were talking about earlier, very like human moments, but also being super stylized. And I felt like Goblin's, there was a lot of shorts coming out of that school that I thought did that pretty well. So
yeah, I mean, France has such a long history of animation, and before that comic book, and before that art. That it's really something that's really rooted in the culture.
Do you remember? Were you there for the show and tell when they brought in everybody into the theater and they wanted to show just inspirational moments, and they had I don't know if you were there for that, but they gathered all the animators, and I remember one of the French guys presented a scene from a French film, and all it was a guy pretending to be a horse.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I didn't take it very seriously at the time. I was like, why are we sitting here watching this? But if I had to take a step back from that, I thought, oh well, I see what they're doing, and to them, it's a really different, novel moment that you don't see in the movies usually. And the guy is doing a good job being a horse. And at the time, it was hard to keep a straight face because I just thought the whole situation was hilarious. But it goes to show, like you said, they have a history of appreciating the pantomime and appreciating like thespians and things like that, right? Like, it's got to be that.
Yeah, I remember that clip. I'm not sure what was the purpose of the clip back then, but I remember seeing it a few times. But yeah, I think it's the long history of culture that they have, and it's even the contemporary culture, and like you're saying, how much they're observing, how much they're aware of these things, and how much attention they give to those things. But yeah, I
was going to say, it seems like, speaking of different countries, in Israel, it feels that animation is getting bigger and bigger, it feels like, right?
Well, I think the animation has been growing in the past, I don't know, I would say like 20 years even.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of big projects going on right now. There's a lot of talented people over there, but there's not a lot of projects that are currently happening. but yeah, I think there's a lot of potential over there, and I'm hoping that one day they'll be able to to pull it to
Right.
the next level of animation for sure.
Yeah, I've met a lot of really talented people through you. Storyboard artists and concept artists and animators, Israeli guys that are like, wow, it seems like I don't know what kind of schools they have there now, but it feels like there's starting to be talent coming out from.
Yeah,
there,
there's not
so-
a lot of schools that really teach the level of craftsmanship that the schools in the States or even in France teach, and that's one of the things that led us to open. We opened like an online school for animation for Israel.
That's right. Yeah, and that's the frame by frame animation school. Yeah.
Yeah, Frame by Frame Animation School was set to do exactly that, to give all these people over there that has big potential a way to learn and to master their skills at the level that is being taught here. It was all taught in Hebrew and in the local marketplace, so they can actually afford it, and they could actually have access to it, and they can do it online from Israel.
Great. And you guys are still operating that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Oh,
it's been
fantastic.
7 or 8 years now.
Really cool.
And we have now 6 or 7, I think, different classes. I don't remember exactly the number.
Super
But
cool.
it's great, yeah. From concept art to traditional animation to 3D animation, all of the spectrum.
So all the Hebrew-speaking viewers can look into
Yes.
frame by frame if they want. So,
Exactly.
Cool. For my huge demo that follows me from Israel.
The huge demographic that comes from Israel, yeah.
That's cool, man. Well, yeah, it's so crazy because I was just thinking about how long it's been, and I think it's amazing because we both started off in the same exact position, and it's pretty inspiring to see how you really stuck to your guns and went from cycle animation and onwards and upwards. In your experience at DreamWorks, was there a particular production that you feel you learned a lot from, or the most from, or one that stood out in terms of just a good experience?
I think every production, you learn so much on a different level. I think the most fun I've had was probably Bilby because it was a completely different experience. But even before that, I think, Kung Fu Panda, the third Kung Fu Panda was a lot of fun for me. This was the first time I got to lead a character, which was the Master Oogway, the turtle.
That's right.
So that was a great experience. But I have to say that the film I feel I learned the most was actually one of the hardest film I've had at the studio, which was How to Train a Dragon 2, the second one. I did not work on the first one. I got to the studio right before they finished the first one, and I really, really loved it. It was one of my favorite films.
As Katzenberg said, it's the first Pixar movie that DreamWorks ever made.
It's actually, I think it was USA Today or one of the newspapers had it on their front page as new Pixar film, How to Train a Dragon.
What? Like, as an actual blooper?
As an actual article. And we were like, man, that's great.
We did it.
Yeah, exactly. No, but we're being cynical about that. But I do think that there was, that showed that the audience really felt something very sincere and very heartful in that film. And I think that film for me was, it's not just one of the best animated films I've ever seen, it's one of the best films I've ever seen.
Correct, yeah.
Because it had something, and again, in my opinion, something that, surpassed time and specific cultures. So when the How to Train a Dragon 2 came out, I really was like, oh, I'd love to be in this movie. Like, this would be amazing. And what I really wanted to do was I wanted to do all these subtle, toothless shots, all these like him and Hiccup and those subtle moments and all that nonverbal relationship between them. And I did not get to do any of that. Basically, all I got to do was a lot of really complicated shots, a lot of really complicated scenes. And even though it wasn't, it was very, very hard. And even though it wasn't what I wanted to do, I feel like I grew a lot from that experience, and I learned a lot of how to do it. And it became something that became one of my strengths at the studio. Became something that I could really excel at with doing these very complicated, heavy scenes.
When you say technical, you're talking about just the technicalities of giant beasts and the physics of that, and sort of right, like that,
it's more than just
shots, right?
it's a lot of that. It's a lot of physicality, a lot of mechanics and stuff like that. But it's also a character jump from one dragon to another, dragons falling on the ground, crashing, rolling, bumping into another dragon, that dragon's jumping in the air. It's those type of shots that people are like, oh, where do I even start?
Right.
And I think that most people get really overwhelmed with that. And
how do you? I was just curious, like when you're handed make 13 dragons do backflips off each other's heads. How do you break it down now? Like just for process.
So after you have your nervous breakdown, no, I'm just kidding. I think the trick for that is mainly simplifying it. Basically, I start with just cubes and spheres, and I try to figure out choreography first.
The main body mass. I just take a cube and I just animate that. And honestly, once I'm done with that, it's like 70% of the work is done. Basically, even complicated kung fu shots. I've had one scene in Kung Fu Panda 3 where Tigress is fighting and she's holding the baby and she's tossing her in the air and she's catching her and she's doing all these kind of tricks with the baby. And I animated the entire scene without the baby. I just had a ball. She was throwing a ball in the air and she was doing all these tricks with the ball. The ball wasn't even parented. It was just to kind of figure out the choreography. And once I have that done, then I put the baby in. Then I kind of start animating the baby on top of that. Gotcha. Yeah.
But I think that's mainly I think that helps me simplify it to a level I can actually understand what's going on and not be overwhelmed with, oh my God, they have wings and they have tails and they have arms and legs and there's so many different characters in the shot. I also try to do it one character at a time. I always think about all of them, but I focus on one thing at a time and I hide a lot of unnecessary stuff.
That's interesting because, you look at 2D animation, 3D animation, and masters like Milt Kahl would do the same sort of approach where they would just sort of focus on, like the volume shape, the shape of the head, right? And once that was sort of working, he would go back and he'd animate another layer and another layer. So yeah, it's cool that it still applies to modern day animation that way.
I mean, I've never seen Milt Kahl specifically doing that because I think I don't know too much about how he worked versus the other guys, but I always thought he was such a great draftsman that he would kind of approach it as the actual drawings. But I know we have Dan Wagner, for example, from DreamWorks. And I know that when he did 2D, he approached it the same way, like like you're saying, mainly doing the big mass and then adding stuff, basically like layering, only in traditional.
Right.
So I think he did a lot of that. I'm not sure. I think so.
Gotcha.
But I think a lot of actually my workflow and my animation skills came from Dan.
Yeah.
Dan was our head of animation on Kung Fu Panda 1, 2, and 3.
We sat like 10 feet away from his office. It was you and me in a cubicle, and then Dan had his door there, sometimes open, sometimes closed, and then like the nervous teenager, we'd go up and be like, "Oh, excuse me, Dan.
Can you take a look?
Can you look at this?"
And it's funny because I had in my cubicle, I had like a tiny
like
gap
a slit?
between, like a slit that I could see when his door was closing, click, and then I would send him, "Hey, can take a look at that?" Because I knew that now he's in.
Right.
And I really took advantage of that because I loved his stuff on Panda and I wanted to pick his brain as much as I could. I even went to his old Kung Fu Panda 1 stuff and I would open the shots and I would look at them and I was analyzing them. How does he work? Because he's a magician.
Yeah.
Like he barely has keys on anything, and it's moving. And no, it's like most people key everything.
Right.
He just keys whatever he needs. The minimum of keys that he barely needs. That's and like there's a shot in Kung Fu Panda 1 of Tai Lung escaping, and he does this big thing, and the arrow hits the
shackles break.
The shackle.
Totally.
And there's all these residual motion and all these beautiful animation. And I opened that shot in emo, it's basically like 5. And you're like, wait, whoa, what? How is everything overlap? It's just the keys are just in the right places.
I remember that shot. It really impressed me.
Yeah.
First, sitting in the theater and seeing everything sort of
exactly
slow motion and settling and everything.
Yeah.
I thought, man,
he's just a magician. It's
crazy.
Voodoo magic, really.
Yeah.
Because other people would put a million keys and animate. I would animate
do the same thing.
A lot more unnecessary stuff than this. And you just the bare minimum to make it look amazing.
The thing I like about Dan Wagner is he was also the first one, because everybody talks about the 12 principles of animation. You got overlap, squash and stretch, this and that. But in 3D, obviously, there's these new, I guess you could call them principles that haven't really been sort of canonized and put into textbooks or anything. But he was the first one that talked about ambient motion, where, which is for people who haven't heard that, it's just in 3D, it's really hard to make stuff come to completely a static pose without it looking dead. So he would, I think on Panda 1, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the one where he really pushed this idea to the studio saying ambient motion every time you come to a stop, because otherwise it's going to look off.
Yeah.
So I think it's neat. I think it's a principle of animation that, again, hasn't found its way out there, but he was the first one to sort of give it a name, a label, you know what I mean? So I thought it was really great of him.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard about it by him, I was like, what is that? What does that mean? Like, I didn't understand. And he explained to me that, yeah, like you're saying, I mean, in real life, there's a lot of different forces. Like, if I put my arm, gravity is pulling on it, and then my muscles are pulling the other way around.
Right?
And then there's all these back and forth that create this ambient motion. And I think Panda is the perfect kind of show for that type of motion, because Poe is, of his physicality and how he moves. It's all about like constant movement, basically. And I think then what he really wanted was to create this certain believability that you really believe that these characters are alive, which it's for me, it's the most important thing. Before style, before appeal, before everything, I want to believe this character is really alive.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very good way to do that. Sometimes it could be a little bit too much when characters are constantly moving. And I think Disney, for example, are doing a really nice way of keeping that ambient to a minimum, that they still hit those poses, but they still have a little bit of that. So it's a really nice balance between the two. So I think the different styles allows you to do it in a different ways, but that principle is very important.
Yeah, it's almost like this 13th principle that needs to be added or somehow to whoever writes the next animation book, right?
Yeah, I think there's a few new ones that that basically you can start thinking about. But
so something I like to ask people who are here, I sometimes I speak for myself and I know a few other people where growing up, you're a kid, and if an animator type or a filmmaker type, you tend to play with stop motion and index cards and this and that. But there's always like a moment, like you're watching a movie or you're in a theater, or there's something like almost like a switch that gets flipped on. You're like, oh, this is really cool. Like, I want to be a part of that. Was there a film or an animation or a cartoon that was like, how does that work? I want to be a part of this world. Like.
Well, I think ever since I was like 5-6 years old, I wanted to do animation. That was basically where I decided.
Early.
Yeah, very, very early. And I remember, it was funny, I just told this story to someone the other day that when I was, I think, 3, maybe 4 years old, we had a burglar coming to our house. And in the middle of the night, my parents were actually out. My grandparents were babysitting us. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw him. And I still, to today, I have that vision of him standing there in the hallway, and I remember exactly how he looks.
Wow.
And he was holding a box in his hand and some jewelry on his other hand. And he saw me. He said something. I'm not even sure what language that was. And he saw me and he left and he ran out. And then the cops came by and they asked me what happened, and I described them what happened, and what I realized then that the box that he had was our VCR, and in that VCR was my tape of animation shorts, films from Disney, basically.
Oh, no.
They were all black and white, like really old stuff that basically I grew up on. I mean, we had color TV back then, but it was all these really, really old Mickey Mouse shorts that I loved as a kid. And from that date on, I decided I'm gonna do a revenge. No, but it was just it was from that age that my passion was animation. Even when I was like 3-4 years old, I was so passionate about that.
So that was pretty tragic in that sense.
It was
your treasure.
It broke my world. I only had we didn't even have cable. It was like this one VCR tape. That was my world of animation, and he stole it. And
have you been able to find the shorts again now that we have the internet?
Yeah, I mean, it took me many years to find that. One of them was the Hare and the Tortoise, and one of them was it was one with Mickey Mouse, Goofy,
Donald Duck.
What's that? Donald Duck, and the bad guy. I don't remember his name, but they were like the car came by. They were fixing his car. It was really, really old rubber hose cartoons.
Yeah.
And I remember them very, very vividly. Like I remember all these shorts really, really well. So it took me many more years to kind of realize that's really what I wanted to do. But from that age, I as soon as I realized that someone's actually creating these cartoons that were so precious to me, I was like, that's what I want to do.
Wow, man.
And the movie that
this explains you so much now.
the obsession.
Yes. The laser
the movie
focus.
that really solidified that's what I want to do was I think it was it was back in the golden time of Disney. They had like Little Mermaid and all these movies coming right after another. The Renaissance of Disney. And when Aladdin came out, I saw the pre-premiere midnight. And my dad took me, and that was the moment I was like, "Yes, there's no turning back. This is what I want to do."
Wow.
And back then it was like I want to do traditional animation. I want to be an animator at Disney. And I even had the book of making of Aladdin, and at the back they said, "Okay, Walt Disney Studios, Burbank, California," and I was like, "That's where I'm going." Seriously, it was something that was really, really from very early on. Only years later, CG started. Started happening,
right.
And I decided, you know what, I felt at that point, this is where it's going, this is where it's gonna head to. So I really wanted to do that.
Yeah. So adapted to what the industry was doing and everything. Yeah.
I think it was Gary's Game. When Gary's Game came out,
okay,
I remember seeing it on TV. No idea what it was doing on TV in the middle of the day.
Game,
yeah,
Pixar, the old guy.
And I saw that, and I didn't understand what that was. Because Toy Story came out before, but Toy Story felt so computer because, the toys and the render and everything, they felt very computery.
Plastic and metal.
When Gary's came out, it was a breathing, thinking human. Mm-hmm. It was a real character. Mm-hmm. And I believed him that he was alive, and that blew my mind.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny. I had a similar experience. It was actually with Toy Story because I was fascinated with just the technology of CG. And my dad would bring home VHS tapes of like really boring PBS documentaries of where they'd have like a teapot with just rotating. And I don't know why I thought it was so fascinating. So, as maybe a 10-year-old. And then I saw, I went to the movies and they had the Toy Story preview. And I saw all those really, really neat computer graphics emoting.
Right.
And I had this, my mind was completely, I almost wanted to stand up in the theater and be like, does no one realize how crazy this is? These things are alive now. And yeah, that sort of, for me, was, at least in regards to CG animation.
Yeah.
Like, there's something amazing about that really caught my eye.
Well,
yeah.
Well, I think most animators that I've met so far are either really obsessed about animation because of the Disney golden days or because of Jurassic Park. Yeah. It's one or the other. And I remember when Jurassic Park
that movie comes up a lot on this, by the way. That movie does come up a lot.
I'm sure it does, because a lot of people change their entire perception of what CG is on that moment when that came out.
Totally.
And I remember as a kid, I liked dinosaurs as a kid, but I've never really, we didn't have so many. Now there's so many different either TV shows or movies, or you see it all the time, right?
Right.
But I remember back then the only thing I saw with dinosaurs, I think, was Land Before Time.
Okay.
Or stuff like that.
Right.
And when I saw Jurassic Park, I didn't even understand what I'm watching.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand it.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the theater with my dad. That was, 1994?
94,
so I was about,
93.
I was, about 11, 12 years old. And I remember we sat in the theater, and there was a kid and his dad next to us that we've never met before. They were just sitting next to us. And the movie starts pretty,
intense.
Pretty intense, right? The guy's getting eaten, he's getting pulled, and you don't see anything. You just hear it's a very, very Spielberg-y thing that you don't see anything.
Right.
And I remember the kid started crying, and his dad took him away, and they left the theater. And I remember going to my dad, looking at him, and I'm like, I'm good. We're staying. Because I was like, I have to see how this ends. And it's true. I remember as a kid, I was like, what is this? What am I watching?
Yeah, yeah.
And
I think I was, I couldn't wrap my head around what I was looking at. So I just believed that it was real, and I believed the story, and that just made the whole experience so incredibly impactful, which is, going back to what you're saying, that's the most important thing, is making it believable. And that way, once you have the audience in that regard, then the story just leaves a mark. It leaves like, wow, that was an experience. That was something that was very real at the moment.
Yeah, I hear a lot of visual effects people talk about, all the visual effects are practical. It's not CG. It's not CG. It's all practical. And I think for me, it's never, the CG is never the problem. It's how it's done. And I think if you make it look, if it calls attention to itself,
right,
then it defeats
you've
the
broken
purpose.
the illusion, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've broken the illusion. And, Marvel actually does it really well because they don't care. They're not trying to sell you that this is believable. They're actually making it into so, lavish and impressive that you're diving into that world and you're accepting it because you know that that's not believable.
That's
you know that that's not
yeah.
real.
Yeah.
And even the way they write the narrative is very, very clever because they write it in a way that now all their new take is the humor and how they treat it, and they don't take it too seriously.
Mm-hmm.
While I think with DC, for example, they take it so seriously, but then it doesn't feel like the effects are so over the top that I'm like, I don't really buy it, but I don't really see it as a cynical way. So I'm kind of lost there, and I don't really connect with the story.
Right.
I think for me, movies like Arrival, for example, where they did the effects just right, and it was just
sophisticated
enough, but it was just the right amount.
Right.
I buy it.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to the idea of how it comes back to the characters being humans and being believable, and if you can't connect on a human level to what's happening, right? Then it's not a film anymore, I guess.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, or at least it's not something you remember. You know what I mean? So, yeah. I don't know if you saw the last Blade Runner, but same director as Arrival. I thought he did a pretty good job.
I haven't seen it yet, but I really want to.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say it's better than the first one. I know there's some Blade Runner fans who would want my head for that, but I think it's narratively stronger than the first one. So
I haven't seen it, and I really want to. I have it on my list. It's actually the same composer, Ben Wolfish, who did our short film, Bilby.
Fantastic!
Yeah.
Whoa, small world.
Yeah.
That is something that I think is interesting. The longer that I stay in this town, and the more projects I work on, the smaller that the city gets, and I think that only happens with time and working on different projects. But
Right.
I think that's a positive thing, because I think I speak for myself. When I first came to Los Angeles, this city felt insurmountable. It seemed really, really big. It seemed, just almost hard to even just getting around. Obviously, navigating the streets and everything seemed like madness. But yeah, it's kind of comforting when the people that you meet on previous projects you run into later, and you just never know who you're going to end up working with, which is another, I guess, a pro tip for industry people. It's like, just be a pro and do your job, and
it's crucial.
You know what I mean?
So important.
Yeah, because you just never know what's going to happen along the way. So, but yeah, I mean, for you I guess when you first left, you went. Your first experience in the United States was it Florida at Ringling?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was 4 years at Ringling.
Was that culturally a pretty big shift for you coming over here?
It was it was a big shift, but also we had a lot of international people from different countries. I have some of my best friends were from, various countries in the world, even back in school and even now. The whole mentality is very, very different. I think I'm coming from a culture that's much more direct, much more no sugarcoating, much more, and all of a sudden in a critique when you're going into class, you're like, I really like what you're doing, but, and then you give the critique, and then you end the sandwich with, but really, really great job.
Yep.
And I was like, well, if you have this critique, why are you sandwiching it with these two compliments?
Right.
And it took me a while to realize that was a civilized way to discuss about it. And even now, people back home from me are like, what's up with all the sugarcoating? Just say it the way it is. But I don't know. I got used to it, and I like the way it's being done in here. I think as long as it's being respectful and it's not, I don't think telling someone sugarcoat something just to make it feel sound to make it sound better is good. But I also think that someone being too direct can offend people.
That's funny. We had Ben Willis on here earlier, and he was talking about how he's anti-compliment sandwich at this point in his life. So it's funny that somebody from not the United States originally is saying, you know what, this actually gets the results that are good, and a guy who was born here is like, you know what, I'm over that.
But you know what's funny? Because Ben, I don't see Ben as being too direct. I see Ben as being very.
I always
very,
felt the same way.
yeah.
I think he's a pretty diplomatic guy, which, to his credit, I think is
great.
why he's really good at his job.
Very, very good. But
Yeah,
I'm saying,
yeah.
from hearing that from him, I'm like, well, you know, you're saying that, but you're really, really nice when you give critique.
Sure, it's like he still has that touch. Which
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is good.
Which I think is the right balance. I think,
Yeah.
I think I try to do the same now. I think I'm not trying to just give, okay, let's do the compliment sandwich just to make it easier. But instead, I'm just trying to be more mindful about, overall it's working, but these are the stuff we can tweak.
Yeah.
If you're telling someone, well, clearly this is not working, what else are you good at? That's not helping him,
Right. Get better.
Get better. And I think that the main point here is that the critique needs to be constructive and needs to help the other person.
It's funny. I don't want to point out a specific, name or point out the name, but I know that there was a certain animator who was sort of legendary in the walls of DreamWorks who had a very different, actually quite opposite approach. And it's interesting because I think he did get results out of people, but it was such an extreme example of being to the point of being cruel that eventually there was a limit to that. And obviously, like he's not in the studio anymore, right? And it was related to that sort of personality type, right? Where it didn't work in a team situation, even though it was different and effective in its own way, right?
Look, I don't mind people giving me very honest and direct critique.
Right.
It took me many years to build this skin that you have to have at that point of, I can take it, but because we're putting so much of ourselves in our work, and because we're making it so personal, it could really offend when you're opening up to someone and they're basically are like, this is garbage. You should not show this to anyone else. So I think that does not help you. As an artist, it's just like it's shutting you down. It's making you not wanting to open up again. And I think if someone's really, really good at what he does and is just being very direct about it, he could still say the same. He could still help you and give you the same criticism, just doing it in a nicer way. So I think there's a balance there.
There is, yeah. I think people like to hear stories about the Milk Hall and guys like that who were so cutthroat or so direct and so mean about it. But yeah, you have to wonder if there's only so much you can do that way before it starts to get not constructive to a team or something. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and I mean, even if you get notes from Milk Hall, which I'm sure would be amazing, and I've heard the stories about all that. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe it is, but I'm not sure if you're at a point that he's not really helping you, but he's more, mocking you. Then I don't think that's going to help you, even if it's Milk Hall. And I don't know. I don't know how the stories actually were, or how much of them is true, or all that stuff. I'm just saying that even if he's amazing, and the way he's giving you the criticism is very offensive, then you're not really growing from that.
It's funny. That's a whole other thing, because I think there's process for people first getting into the industry. And I think something that young people, when they first join, have to sort of realize that even though, because like you said, you're putting a lot of yourself into your work. So sometimes you take it as a personal attack because you're being very, it is almost like they're rejecting you. You know what I mean? And I think it is sort of a mental trick to learn how to compartmentalize that and be like, this is my work, and I have to just sort of be willing to kill my baby, you know, and be like, here you go, do what you want with it. There's that sort of mental professionalism, and then there's also the directorial one, which is a different set of things, which is kind of like this technique of giving notes. And I remember we had Adam Polonian, who's a director at Nickelodeon, who does SpongeBob, and he did something that I thought was interesting, where sometimes if you're in a brainstorming session and people are popping ideas left and right, and maybe somebody's very passionate about an idea, but it's really not fitting the overall goal of, like, say, a SpongeBob cartoon. Instead of just being like, stop right there, I don't want to hear anymore, he'll actually add to it, and they'll sort of like run down this like a rabbit hole and be like, oh, then this and then this and then this, and then you play with the idea and you take it as far as you can. But at the end of the day, like, that doesn't mean that he's going to take it and put it in the cartoon.
Right.
But instead of just being like, stop it, he'll be like, you know what, this is fun, and we're going to play with this because we're creative people.
Right.
And, you know, what's the point of putting your foot down? You know what I mean? So I thought that was an interesting thing. I thought that's something I kept in my head.
No, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's a whole nother skill set too. It's like, so, well, again, going back to Bilby, did you obviously you were stretched a little bit that way because you were put in that position of directing something. So, do you think there was things that you learned and you got out of that in that regard? Like,
oh, for sure, it was a huge learning experience.
Yeah,
I think one of the biggest things I learned, that when you think of directors before you get a chance to do it, you think, okay, that person has all the answers. They already know. They know every possible answer for any possible question you have. And when you put in that position, you're like, I don't have the answers. I'm trying to figure them out.
Right.
And I think as long as you have a vision, and as long as you have where you know it's gonna head, I think the other side of that is that you need to trust your team to deliver what they're good at, and not try to tell everybody exactly how to do their job. Micromanage them. And I think that the trick is to be like, I don't know how to fix this, but this is what I'm feeling from it, and this is why I think it doesn't work, or this is where I think it should go, and you guys can figure out how to make it work. And I think that's something that was really important to learn, because it is a huge team effort. Even though you're the director and you're kind of leading that ship.
How big was the team on Bilby? Sorry.
I think we had over 100 people at one point.
Wow,
Maybe
crazy.
not at the same time, but working on different departments.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and I am coming from a background that has I have experience from modeling to rigging to even lighting and animation, and I've done a lot of the different things, but I cannot call myself an expert in a lot of these. So for me, for lighting, for example, was, we had to rely heavily on our CG soups and our head of lighting to basically, do what they do best, and just trust them. And the way we would direct them was, this scene needs to feel like the hottest place on earth. I don't know how you create that, but that's the feel that we want.
Right.
So yeah, I think you learn a lot from doing that. I think you learn a lot from supervising. Like, I've been doing that for the past almost year on How to Train Dragon 3.
Yeah.
So you learn a lot from working with different people, giving people notes. Every person is very different. It's a big part of it is to learn how to give notes to different people.
Right. It's interesting you say that, because my favorite kind of note as an artist is like that first thing you mentioned, where you go, this is the feeling that we want, go nuts. Like, whatever, interpret that as you will. But then it's true, because then there are people that you work with when they want to actually be a little bit micromanaged and told exactly how things need to go. So yeah, I think more often than not, people fall into the first category, especially the super ambitious people that you meet at a place like DreamWorks or Pixar, because it's everybody's there's a reason you get into those places, because you're very obviously creative. So yeah, I've noticed that, and you're right, it really depends on the personality type. And I guess for Bilby, did you find that did you try something with someone and the results didn't quite work out, so then you had to modify your approach, and then it did work out?
Absolutely. And I think even with specifics, it was like, if I had this is the overall look, this is the overall feel, and that was not coming through, then you dive into another layer of, I think this would really help. I think this is what's missing. And then if that doesn't come through, then you dive into another level. But I think it's giving your team, an opportunity to kind of get there. And I feel your biggest role as director is kind of steering it to the right direction. Mm-hmm. That's your biggest thing. And I feel that as director, one of the things that's the most important is that directing to me is a lot of small decisions. It's not one big thing that you're like, this is what's going to make it or break it. it's on a daily basis. You have a lot of decisions, and if you get most of them right, you get a good product, and if you get most of them wrong, then you get a bad product.
Right.
But each one of them is like a tiny thing, a tiny thing, a tiny thing, and they accumulate to something really big at the end.
Right, right. So yeah, that's cool because that's sort of it's a constant recalibration of what other people are deciding to do.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you land somewhere close to what the idea was in your head to begin
And I
with.
think in Bilby, we got it really, really close to our original vision,
Yeah.
and a lot closer than I thought it would get, and even better than I imagined it. You know,
Yeah.
like visually, it's better than I imagined it in my head, which is great.
So I'm not sure the exact date that this particular talk will be published, but what is the plan for Bilby in terms of release, and what's Dreamworks planning on doing with it?
So for the next few months, we're basically screening it in different festivals. We premiered it in Annecy in June, and since then we've been screening it in different festivals around the world.
You guys have won a couple things already, right?
Yeah, we won the Audience Award at Palm Springs, and we won the Jury Award in SIGGRAPH. And those were both of them were very, very exciting. And as we continue, we're constantly showing it in different places.
Cool. So for you personally, do you think what sort of ambitions or career goals you want to have at some point? Is directing something you want to do more of? Like, you know, I know you're going to be supervising more, so.
Yeah, it's funny. Before doing Bilby, I didn't even think about it because it sounds like a crazy dream, right? I mean, directing in a studio such as DreamWorks is crazy. Once the opportunity came, it ignites something in you. All of a sudden, I have so many ideas and story ideas and just character ideas and scenes and stuff that are coming to the surface that I really want to explore and I really want to start doing, which is something I started to do to develop new ideas and new stories, new of all that stuff. So I think after doing it once is something I would love to do again in a number of different constellations, if it's a short film or a feature film or even personal projects. But it's definitely something I want to continue doing.
Do you think about live action maybe?
I am not thinking about live action. I feel there's so many amazing people that are doing live action really, really well.
Yeah.
And I feel that's not my
Passion.
my passion. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's cool, man. Awesome.
You know what my favorite thing to do?
Yeah.
It's not my favorite.
Liron, what's your favorite thing to do?
I don't think it's my favorite thing to do, but you know when you drive at night and someone doesn't have their lights on?
Uh-huh.
I love doing the flickering, so I let them know, and then they turn the lights on.
Right.
I feel like I just saved the day. I feel like I literally just saved them.
Did you learn that in the United States, or is that something you've always
It's something I always no. Back home we do the same.
Okay.
But every time I do that, I feel so good
I
about
don't
it.
make it sound like. Did you have?
We
have
had
electricity?
cars. When you ride the camel, you flicker with the lights, and the camel goes. Yeah.
That's funny. Well, just for fun, let me ask you. Is there like a new kind of cuisine that you discovered over here? Like, oh my God, I didn't know this was a thing.
I'm not a big. I'm
foodie?
not very adventurous with different types of
That's
food.
true. I remember when we were at DreamWorks, you would always have the fried or the grilled chicken.
Yeah.
And like, you know, was it? I forgot what else. Like potatoes.
Yeah,
or
I
something?
usually get like the chicken and a salad and very, very simple things. I'm not too adventurous with food.
That's hilarious. Man, I'll tell you, I was at DreamWorks for like about 3 years or so, and you came in I think 6 months after I did, and I remember, I don't know, we had a lot of good moments when we were there. I remember, I guess I had a bit of an infamous reputation for, not that I didn't. The thing is, here's the thing. Before I say too much. You know, I always got my work done. It was always at a certain quality. That was never the issue. But I realized that for the type of job we had, oftentimes you found yourself with a lot of extra time. That was just the nature of it. If you were super fast, you had that problem. But yeah, I had more than one occasion. I remember, I think you'd hear me snoring sometimes in my cubicle. But yeah, we had that little thing between our cubicles.
Yeah.
So, because I think we still wanted that privacy, but Yeah, I don't know how often that's something that you had to
No,
deal
I just remember one day you're coming. I was working, and you're coming to my cubicle, and you're like, "Did you hear me snore?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like,
Okay, yeah.
"Well, I was I was just sleeping under my desk." And I'm
Yes.
like, "Are you kidding me?"
Oh, you know what's funny? Luke used to sit where you sat,
And where I
and
used to sit,
yeah,
I think he
yeah.
was on the other side.
Oh no, you're right. No, he was on the other
Yeah,
side. So
Alberto
yeah,
used to sit where I used to sit
that's
before.
what happened. That's what happened. And yeah, but yeah, it was funny. I think the worst of that type of situation was I wasn't because what I used to do is I would put my legs, and there was actually chairs very similar to these.
Yeah, exactly the same.
Very almost the same. And I would put my feet up on top where you put your butt, and then my torso I would lay underneath the desk. So if somebody walked by, it looked like an empty chair, and then it worked out okay. But one particular day, I was just passed out in my chair, and I remember that the production team came by to check to see if my stuff was ready, and I'm laying back there with my mouth open, like that kind of thing. And they roused me awake. They're like, Rodrigo, hey, well, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, hey. And I like wiggle the mouse, get the computer back on. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're just here to. And then I hit the play blast, showing the character do the thing. And it's like a duck or something, like walking or something. And they go, okay, that looks great. And then they all left. And which goes back to my point. It's like, at least I got the work done. But yeah, it was just sometimes it got a little slow. That's all.
Yeah.
Sometimes it got a little slow. But yeah.
No, I think when I got to DreamWorks, I think I was very frustrated at the beginning because start doing cycles. You really want to get to those meaty shots, and when you start doing those cycles, background characters that no one really cares about, it could be very frustrating. So what I did, I started just doing a lot of my own
Tests.
personal tests. I would just grab characters and do tests, and grab characters and do tests, and and I would do it so often that at the end of Kung Fu Panda 2, I animated an entire sequence by
I
myself.
remember that. We actually went out to the park and shot some reference
Yes,
for
exactly.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, we shot some Kung Fu reference.
Yep.
Ooh.
Yep.
But
I'm honored that I was your Kung Fu
yeah,
go-to
exactly.
Kung Fu guy. Yeah.
But it was fun, and I did all the camera work, and I did all the editing and everything basically. And I was so passionate about getting to animate real shots that I just kept doing more and more and more. And I think that was actually one of the things that helped me get promote out of cycles into
Definitely.
animation
Definitely.
the most. That was probably the thing. But it's it could be very frustrating for for a long time. All you're being tasked is those
Yeah.
tiny little characters.
It gets tedious and sort of the same
Yeah,
thing.
I think it's just like an actor who comes to Hollywood and he wants his his moment, and then he's being police officer number 3,
Right.
or waiter number 2.
Right.
So that could be very frustrating.
What you've been on the campus for a while now, I know something that was always fun about being there was that every now and then you'd have a voice actor celebrity show up. So
Yeah.
I remember one day Spielberg was there. I didn't actually get to see him, but his car was parked there. And have you had a lot of fun? Like, I don't know, random, like, oh look, Jack Black's in the urinal next to me peeing, and
Yeah,
is
Jack
weird.
Black actually came by. I think he came by a few times, but I remember one time I was sitting and working, and I hear his voice, and I'm like, "Is this someone playing a shot of Poe?" And I'm looking beyond the cubicle, and I see him standing right there, talking with Ludo, one of the animators next to us, and I'm like, "It's hey."
It's Poe.
And he was awesome. He was so nice, and he was so like talking about comic books and where he likes buying them, and he was just like really really fun. Very down to earth guy. So
He strikes me as somebody who he really likes this whole world of animation, and he's like
I think so.
He's a geek about it, right?
I actually wish we would use him for more movies because I think he brings a lot of himself. The problem is that he's so iconic to Poe that his voice automatically. I mean, he's also I don't remember the name of the character from Shark Tale, but he's also that. And even though a lot of people know that movie,
Right.
Kung Fu Panda was the one that people
broke
actually
out of
remember
that.
him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I remember Guillermo was on the campus for a while, but I just never had I never had a real reason to go up and talk to him. And
Yeah.
I always felt like, well, I don't want to bother the guy. But
Well, you're both Mexicans, so you
I
could
know. I
use that.
figured we could have been like, hey, you like tacos? You want to talk about that? But yeah, and I was to be honest, it was like intimidating. I was like, this guy's amazing. So what am I gonna bring to the table? But he seemed pretty receptive, though. He seemed like he wanted to.
He seemed to, yeah. I've never talked with him, but he seemed to.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've had a bunch of different people coming by. I think, I don't know, it never really excited me too much about how much these people are famous or not famous.
Right.
I think it's more people that I really respect as, actors. For example, Bryan Cranston, when he came by, I just really like him as an actor. I really like what he's doing. I really appreciate him in that level.
Right.
So it's not so much the fact that he's famous, it's just so much that I really respect this person.
Yeah. I think, I remember you were super into Breaking Bad, so that must have been pretty cool to see a guy like that.
I actually started watching Breaking Bad after everybody. Like I was basically on when they had the last season, and I just caught up with everything. But it was
the
really
best way,
show.
man. You just binge it. You don't have to wait. And then I think I was similar. I think I binged up until near the end, and then like everybody else, I was
just caught up
waiting for the last couple to come out. So.
Yeah, no, it was really, really good show. One of the best.
Yeah, I met the guy who plays Mike. The older guy with the ears that kind of pop out. He was at Fox ADHD. Is one of the voice actors there, and I hadn't watched any Breaking Bad at that point. So, I was just like, oh, he's going to do the voice for so and so. And back then the operation was happening in a house in Los Feliz, not a studio at all. So I was just like hanging out in the living room with Mike, and I was like, hey, man. It's cool that you're going to be doing this thing for us. Awesome. And he was just like, yeah. With this very old man, gentle voice. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like him too. I think he's a good actor.
Yeah. Have you met, was there any filmmakers that gave a talk or anything at DreamWorks that was like, oh man, I can't believe so-and-so?
We had a few. We have Wes Anderson coming by. We had, what's his name?
Pete Docter, I know, showed up once.
Pete Docter came by.
James Cameron was there.
James Cameron was there.
Yeah,
we had a lot of different people. All of them gave great talks. It was fun seeing Pete Docter at the studio.
He was easy to talk to because it seemed like the turnout wasn't that crazy because it felt like James Cameron, right? Like it's
that was crazy packed.
Right? But then a guy like Pete Docter, who I think the animation department, like folks like us, were geeking out harder than anybody. So yeah, it felt like I was waiting for the bodyguards to show up and tackle me for getting close, but he gave his talk and then he was just kind of standing around, looked like he was awkwardly didn't know what to do. So I just went up and said, "Hey man, I'm a big fan of the stuff you've done," which is true. Like him, I feel like him and Brad Bird are my favorite Pixar directors. So yeah, and of course, as expected, the most regular, generous, cool person. Sadly, sometimes you meet certain directors and whose work is not always super stellar, but they're still big shots. And sadly, they're not always the most friendly people.
Yeah.
So it's nice when your heroes tend to be, human beings.
Oh, for sure. No. It's especially when you get a chance to show your heroes your work. I think. One of the people as a teenager, one of the people I really admired was Michael Dudok-Dewitt. He's originally from Swiss, but he did this film called The Monk and the Fish in France, in Valence. And when I was 16 years old, I was like, I saw that the film came from Valence, from Folimage, the studio, and I was like, I'm gonna meet him. So as a 16-year-old kid, I bought a flight ticket, I went there, and I came to the studio. And when I got there, they told me, I talked with him in advance, but when I got there, I was basically waiting to meet him. And they're like, he doesn't work here anymore. He did this film and he moved on. Because he was like an indie director.
Yeah.
And I was like, that was very, disappointing. But the head of the studio actually knew him in person, so he gave him a call, and I got to talk to him as a 16-year-old kid.
That's crazy.
And in Annecy, a few months ago,
with Bilby,
right? We screened Bilby for our premiere, and he was there. And I was like, oh my God, Michael Dudok-Dewitt. You remember back then? And he had no idea, but he was such a nice guy.
Yeah.
And having the chance to really show him my film
that's fantastic.
Was huge because, it was one of my idols as a kid.
Yeah, kind of now it's my turn to sort of hopefully hopefully you enjoy, right?
Yeah, and it was really really a nice kind of closure.
That's crazy.
And it was really really good.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're going to give an up-and-coming animation student, someone who wants to be in the industry, one piece of advice, what would it be?
One.
What would you tell them? One.
So I'll pass on an advice that was given to me. I met Zach Parrish when I was at Sony. Zach Parrish was an animator, and I think he's at Disney for years now. He was the head of animation on Big Hero 6, and he's one of the best animators I know. He's just phenomenal. And when I met him, we were both animating on Alice in Wonderland. And one of the things he told me was that what made him so, first of all, fast, but also basically so good, was that he just couldn't stop animating just a lot of random stuff. Instead of focusing, I think a lot of students are like, I'm going to do my acting shot now. I'm going to spend 4 months on it, and I'm going to polish, every tiny thing. And then what happens is you start your animation, and after 4 months, you're not at that place anymore. Especially when you're a student, every month you learn so much and you grow so much. So when you start an animation, and then 4 months later, you're not at the same place anymore. You're basically regretting all these choices that you've done for the past 4 months, and you're basically polishing something that's not good anymore. So what he told me was that instead, he would just animate a character walking in, stumbling, falling on the ground. Next day. He would animate a character throwing a basketball. Next day. He would animate a character pick up a bottle. Next day. And each one of them, he would learn something, right? Mm-hmm. After doing that for a month, you'd have 30 different animations. Mm-hmm. After doing that for 2 months, you have 60 different animations. After doing that for a few months, then you decide, okay, now I'm going to do it for a week. Mm. Then you do a few weeks. Then you're going to, okay, now I'm going to do it for a month. But you're exponentially growing in such a higher rate that I feel you would get a lot better by just practicing a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I told a lot of different students before. Not a lot of people have done it. And the ones I have, I've seen the most progress of.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think if I could, and actually I used to do a lot of it back when I was in school. In summertime, I would do a lot of these small ones, but I wouldn't do that many. Mm-hmm. And he just said that he would just do tons of them. And you can see that because I think it's like a certain mileage, right?
Yep.
It's like the first 10,000 hours, the first 10,000 drawings, the first 10,000
hours, right?
So basically, when you get to that level, every animation you start doing is in a different level from where you started.
So it's almost a technique of logging those hours as soon as you can, instead of waiting for the opportunity for somebody to give you that. Yeah. Or to just bite off more than you can chew. That's really cool. That's a really good thing that I think anybody can apply to anything, right?
I think it's for anything, and I think other arts, for some reason, are doing that a lot more than visual arts. If you're playing a piano, you're not starting by I'm going to compose my masterpiece right now. Right. You start by I'm going to do this, and I'm going to practice this for a month. And then I'm going to play this, this symphony, and then I'm going to play this. And then for years, you're just practicing other people's work. And you're just practicing and practicing and practicing until one day you're like, okay, now I'm ready. After years of doing that, now I'm ready to create my own music, to compose my own song or a score. And for some reason in visual arts, people don't do that much. From the first moment you start doing a drawing, you're like, I'm doing figure drawing, but now I'm going to create my conceptual art. Right. And I think that's great, but you first need to practice the technique. Right.
I mean, that's why some of the best artists have just the daily sketchbooks, and you always see those guys drinking coffee and just.
It's a lot of practice. So if you're doing animation and you're doing bouncing ball and you're like, okay, I'm done, next. No, just do 20 bouncing balls. Right. Until you can knock it out in no time. Right. Until you don't think about it.
Where it's like muscle memory at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. That's cool. Well, Liron, thanks for being on the show. A lot of good stuff we talked about today, and best of luck on your future stuff, man.
Thank you so much. Yeah. We should do part B sometime.
Yeah, actually, we've talked about that. It'd be cool to eventually have people come back on and or have a multi-animator,
Yeah,
discussion.
yeah, that would be fun.
It'd be good. Maybe the Bilby team or something.
Oh, that'd be great.
That'd be
That'd
sweet.
be really nice.
Yeah. Well, that'll be it for this week on Shot Talk, and we will see you guys next time.
If you like this episode of Shot Talk and would like to see more episodes in the future, join the Shot Talk Patreon at patreon.com/shottalk. You'll get access to private Discord servers, Q&A opportunities for the guests, and more. Also, if you're enjoying these beats, you can follow me at jetsy.bandcamp.com. Thanks, and see you next time.